Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. It was 2018 when I started dating Alex. At first, he was a total catch, dedicated to his studies, fun to hang out with, attentive, and always surprising me with little gifts. He worked hard at his retail job too, but slowly, things started going downhill. Alex began skipping classes more often. Then, he barely went at all. Even worse, he never lifted a finger around our place. No dishes, no cleaning, no laundry, nada. He ended up getting fired from his job for constantly being a no-show. All he wanted to do was veg out playing video games or endlessly scrolling through Reddit. This left me having to pick up extra shifts, double, even triple shifts sometimes, all while juggling classes and schoolwork. I later realized this was Alex's MO. He'd get super into something for a while, but then get bored and revert to his lazy ways. Then he'd find a new obsession and the cycle would repeat. I should have ended things way sooner, but I was hopeful he'd snap out of it and we could go back to how we were in the beginning. Yeah, right. I caught Alex hooking up with some random chick and kicked him out. It wasn't until the next day that our shared bank account popped into my head. We had around £6,000 in there, most of which was my hard-earned money aside from a few hundred Alex had put in. I checked the account and every last penny was gone. Alex had drained our account dry and moved into a new flat with his side piece. I called the bank, but they said since it was a joint account, there was nothing illegal about him withdrawing the funds. The cops said the same thing when I reported it, just a civil matter, not criminal. They suggested taking Alex to court, but warned I'd probably end up spending more on legal fees than I'd get back, so it might not be worth it. Alex had straight up stolen £6,000 from me, and there was jack I could do. I felt like such an idiot. To make matters worse, I saw Alex's posts all over Reddit gloating about his fancy new gaming setup, TVs, and gadgets, all bought with my savings. I'm not usually a vengeful person, but I was furious and dying to get even, and that's when the perfect plan hit me. One summer during university, I'd temped at a debt collection agency. Horrible work, but it paid really well for a few months. Alex had been dodging old debts for years and was super smug about almost reaching the statute of limitations of 6 years, after which creditors can't legally enforce repayment, though you still technically owe. What Alex didn't know is that making any payment on the debt, even just a tiny one, resets that 6-year clock. Previously, when we were dating, I'd used insider knowledge to help Alex avoid the debt collectors, but now I knew exactly how to screw him over. Towards the end of our relationship, I was handling all of Alex's affairs, including his debts, so I had all the paperwork listing who he owed and how much. I started calling up his creditors, straight up telling them I was a friend making a payment on Alex's behalf. I paid the bare minimum on each debt, usually just £1, sometimes £1.50 if that was the smallest amount allowed. Best £10 I ever spent. I also updated them with Alex's new address and contact info, as well as his parents' address too. Having been in collections, I knew they couldn't officially change his address since I wasn't the account holder, but they could make notes that would link those addresses to Alex's name. If they ever got a hit, they'd update his file. My trap was set. All I had to do was sit back and wait. A few months rolled by. Then, the Facebook post started. Alex went from bragging about his sweet rig to panicking about being sued. He called me begging for advice. I told him to get bent. Since I wasn't helping, Alex turned to his online buddies, who gave him the brilliant advice not to show up to court since they can't prosecute you if you're not there. 100% wrong. Not showing up to civil court is one of the dumbest things you can do. This was only getting better. Sure enough, Alex was a no-show at his hearing. A few weeks later, photos of his empty apartment. The bailiffs had seized every last one of his prized possessions. Not only that, but Alex now had multiple CCJs, county court judgments, tanking his credit into oblivion. CCJs make it extremely difficult to get approved for anything beyond a basic bank account. Damn near impossible for a loan or mortgage, and a lot of landlords won't even rent to you. He'd also be screwed trying to get certain jobs, like anything finance-related. With Alex now flat broke and his toys taken away, his side chick naturally bounced. I never got that £6,000 back, but seeing everything he blew my savings on get ripped away from him felt amazing. Hope it was worth it, Alex. For anyone wondering how a university student racked up 6 years of debt to begin with, Alex first attended a different school at 18 but dropped out after 1 year. Then at 25, he convinced his parents to bankroll a business degree, dreams of being an entrepreneur dancing in his head. As for the age gap between us, I'd deferred starting uni for a few years to travel abroad. I was 22 when we met. Alex was 26. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my house for over 15 years now and have never had any issues with my neighbors. We all keep to ourselves, but are still friendly if we happen to be outside at the same time. A nice balance that I appreciated after dealing with horrible neighbors in the past. That balance got thrown out the window when the people living behind me moved and the house got purchased by Brad. I first met Brad when he came over to introduce himself and seemed nice enough. He was doing some renovations on the property, which didn't bother me at all. Problems started about 2 months after Brad moved in. I began finding small branches and leaves accumulating in my backyard near the fence we shared. I didn't think too much of it at first, figuring it was just normal debris from his yard work, but the branches kept falling and it soon became a constant annoyance to clean up. I also started noticing some of my plants right by the fence were getting damaged. It finally clicked that there must be a tree on Brad's property dropping things over the fence. I headed over to talk to Brad and clear things up. I knocked on his front door and he opened it with a friendly, "Hey neighbor, what's up?" I politely explained the situation about the branches and leaves falling into my yard from what seemed like a tree on his property near our shared fence. I asked if he could maybe trim back the tree limbs hanging over my yard. Brad got a sour look on his face and curtly said, "That's my property and my tree. I'll do what I want with it." He then promptly closed the door in my face. I was a bit shocked at his sudden change in attitude, but tried to brush it off. I figured I'd give him some time to cool off and maybe he'd come around. But another week went by and nothing had changed. More branches and leaves continued raining down. My patience was wearing thin. I left a carefully worded letter in Brad's mailbox asking again if he could please trim back the overgrown tree branches. No reply. A few days later, a heavy storm rolled through. I was in my kitchen when I heard a loud crack outside. I rushed to look out the window just as a massive tree branch from Brad's yard came crashing down onto my back deck. It had smashed right through my patio cover and cracked the deck railing. I was seeing red. I grabbed my phone and dialed Brad's number to give him a piece of my mind. It went straight to voicemail, so I left a message demanding he call me back immediately to discuss the damage. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Brad, and he didn't sound happy. "What do you want?" he asked rudely. I told him one of his tree branches had fallen and caused major damage to my back deck during the storm. Brad laughed and said, "Not my problem. I told you, it's my property and my tree. I'm not paying for any of your supposed damage." Then he hung up on me. I was absolutely stunned. I knew Brad was being difficult about the tree, but I never expected this level of negligence and disregard. That's when I decided enough was enough. If Brad wanted to play hardball, then I would bring out the big guns. I took photos documenting all the damage and called my insurance company to make a claim. Since the tree was on Brad's property, his insurance would be liable. I also called a lawyer and explained the situation. She advised me that I had a very solid case to take legal action and press Brad for damages. She helped me draft a formal demand letter to Brad stating he had 30 days to pay for the damage or I would file a lawsuit. The letter clearly outlined the events, included all my evidence, and demanded he pay $5,000 for repairs and emotional distress. I hand-delivered it to make sure he got the message loud and clear. A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Brad's insurance company. The rep said Brad had forwarded my demand letter and they wanted to investigate my claim. Perfect. After reviewing my documentation, they agreed the damage was clearly caused by a tree on Brad's property. They accepted full liability and said they would be paying out the full $5,000 I had requested. Justice. The rep also mentioned they had dropped Brad as a client due to repeated issues and non-cooperation. Brad's own destructive stubbornness had cost him. An inspection crew came out later that week and repaired all the damage to my deck. They did an excellent job. My property looked brand new. The best part was receiving a $5,000 check in the mail personally addressed to me a few days later. I considered sending Brad a smug photo of me holding the check, but thought better of it. I was simply satisfied knowing that his willful negligence had come back to bite him hard, and I had my property restored on his dime. My polite attempts to resolve things were ignored, but the legal system set things right. It just goes to show you can't allow a destructive neighbor to walk all over you. Stand up for yourself and don't back down. The next one is a petty revenge story. I once had a deckhand on a ship I was on. I am a commercial mariner, named Tyrese. Tyrese was about 15 years younger than me and had a chip on his shoulder a mile wide. He lived to piss you off and seemed to almost take pride in doing a poor job in everything, if for no other reason than to demonstrate his contempt for you. He was late 20s, but seemed to behave like an angry teenager sometimes. I have lots of stories about Tyrese, but this was the first one. Tyrese and I would take turns sounding, measuring the amount of water inside, the ballast tanks. To sound the ballast tanks, you had to unscrew a cap to access the pipe for sounding it and send down a measuring tape. Although the cap had a square fitting for a special opening tool, there was no reason to tighten it when closing. The 20 or so sounding tubes we had were all inside the ship, spread around the cargo holds and not in any danger of getting contaminated with anything like rainwater or waves, and the wrench was a 2-foot, 60 centimeters tool that was a hassle to lug around. So you could just tighten them by hand, skip the tool, and loosen them when it came time to sound the tank. Tyrese and I would take turns doing this, once a week. After his second time doing the soundings, I noticed that about 1/3 of the caps were too tight for me to open, and I had to go back and get a wrench for the remaining tight ones. The next day, I asked him not to tighten the caps so much, as there was no reason to. Just get them snug with your fingers. He had just recently been disciplined by me for being on his phone at work, again, and was still a bit salty. Sure enough, the following week, every single ballast cap was too tight for me to open. I asked him again not to tighten them so much. Just snug them up with your fingers is fine. I asked him if there was any reason every single cap was too tight for me to open, and why he didn't just finger snug them. His response? I just tighten them by hand. I guess your grip just ain't strong enough, mate. Okay, Tyrese. I again showed him how to close them without over-tightening them too much. But the next time around, it was the same thing. As I headed back up to the main deck to grab the opening tool, inspiration struck. After sounding all of the tanks, I made sure to tighten them just a little more than Tyrese would be able to do by hand. Sure enough, the following week, Tyrese, who was not blessed with much in the way of critical thinking, had to lug the wrench around to all 24 ballast-sounding tubes, and at break, he was irate that I had tightened them so much. My response of, I just tightened them by hand. I guess your grip just ain't strong enough, Tyrese, went right over his head, so I put on my good leader cap. Tyrese, I don't like having to lug around that damn wrench all over the ship to open ballast caps any more than you do. I showed you how to close ballast caps, but I guess it hasn't gotten through to you. Maybe this will. If I have to carry that goddamn wrench with me all over the ship, I'ma make damn sure you gotta do the same. Now. Are we clear? I could almost see the light bulb over his head. Aight, he said, and walked away. He only over-tightened 2 ballast caps after that, likely to test me. I returned the favor on both of them, and it never happened again. The next one is a malicious compliance story. My friend worked at a jewelry store, and the attire was a business suit. She loves her job because she is surrounded every day by precious metals and stones. She's a nerd for Victorian fashion or whatever equus there is regarding fashion, balls, princesses, and royalty of Europe. Anyways, the only thing she hates in that job was the manager, Susie. From the account of my friend, Susie has an attitude similar to the fairy godmother from Shrek, very kind in front of customers, but would then bare her teeth when they left. Her favorite pastime was to chat with a customer while criticizing the employees with remarks about their looks, appearance, or how what accessories they wore didn't match their complexion and such, and she seems to have a grudge for my friend. Probably because she engages with the customer with minor trivia like, did you know jade has a hidden meaning and such? And it made a lot of people return to the store. One day, Susie came in extremely pissed and started off on my friend about how she looks. Mind that she dresses as plainly as possible because she geeks out when it comes to anything fashion related to the 14th century. And that she has to look like what the customer wants to look like. I imagined that a light bulb went off on her head and blood rushing to her face as she thought things she could wear and whatnot. So, for the entire week, which crosses Valentine's Day, she dressed up in gowns and dresses matched with accessories that made her look like a Barbie princess. The entire time, there were people coming up to her about the dress, the accessories, and the theme, to which she explained with delight. Susie was steaming the entire time. She tried to get her fired, but the owner was present because of the upcoming holiday and was happy with the increase in sales then. I managed to sneak by and saw her in a white dress that screamed Frozen if it had an Eastern vibe to it, and Susie glaring from the back. I heard she left after the week was over without notice and someone else was promoted. My friend wasn't too bothered because the current manager had seniority and was pretty chill, so she's happy. The next one is an entitled people story. I've read a lot of these but never ended up posting, but this has to be one of the most entitled experiences of my life, so I figured I would share. This happened a few years ago at my first job working as a cashier in Walmart while in grade 12. I, F17 at the time, was going about my job normally, getting people through cash and just trying to get through my shift with my social anxiety. An elderly woman comes through my cash, doesn't say a word through the entire transaction, has a cart absolutely filled with stuff. After everything has been scanned and bagged, she used her card and started putting everything in the cart. It was declined, I told her so, and she just stared at me. So I handed her the little receipt slip saying her card was declined. Now, normally people say oops and fix it, no problem. Instead, she barely looks at the slip and then just walks away with her cart full of stuff. I immediately called for my CSM, put the transaction on hold, and started helping the next customer while I waited. CSM arrives, and as I'm trying to quietly explain what happened while still tending to customers, a woman maybe in her 30s walks up and starts yelling at me. Straight up yelling at me about how her mother never got her receipt. I was completely rattled, but looked over towards the exit and saw the older woman standing with her cart. I pointed at her and asked if that was her mother. She said yes and started going off on me about the receipt again. When I could finally get a word in, I explained that her mother didn't have a receipt because she hasn't actually paid for her items yet, her card was declined. At this point, I expected there to be at least a little change in her attitude, but nope. She seems to get even more upset with me and asks why the hell I let her walk away without paying. I had to bite my tongue to keep from saying, what was I supposed to do, physically restrain an old lady? My CSM cut in and took the receipt with the transaction on hold and the woman over the customer service to sort things out. Afterwards, he came back with a coworker and had her take over my cash so I could give him the full story of what happened. He told me that I did the right thing in that situation, apologized that I got yelled at by a customer, and told me to go ahead and go on my break. I honestly just couldn't believe that this woman tried to blame me for her mother's card being declined and acting like I was an absolute villain for such a small thing that I could not have controlled. The next one is an entitled parent story. I'm a 28F, and currently am almost 9 weeks pregnant with my third baby. I live approximately 15 hours away from my parents and have minimal contact with them because they are so overbearing and entitled. This is going to be somewhat of a vent post because I am dreading how they will be when the new baby arrives. It's due 3 days before my dad's birthday, and when he heard that, immediately it was all about him. With my first pregnancy, my parents were mad that they weren't told the baby's now small child's name before everyone else. It was the same day as everyone from close friends to in-laws to extended family. Everyone learned it at the same time, but no, they were mad and loved to bring it up constantly. If you check out my page, there are some disturbing stories about how they were when she, firstborn, was born. Second child. They were mad they were the last to know when I announced the pregnancy and his name. Essentially, if they aren't the first, they are the last. They are always competing with everyone we know, even if they are the people in closest proximity. They wanted to visit the month of his birth. I stood my ground and said no. Hissy fits and silent treatment followed. I have previous posts on that as well. Visits since then have been annoying, to say the least. They hijack an entire week of our lives. They also try to make my brother, who is in his 30s and still lives with them and is treated like a slave, clean my house without discussing it with me. I put an end to it right away. When I announced this third pregnancy, trust me, it was a surprise to everyone, including me. I decided to announce in a group chat. Just so they can't argue, they were the last to know. Well, they called me within minutes and did this whole fake cry routine about why didn't you tell us yesterday? Can we just collectively facepalm? So now that they know what month and approximately the week the baby is due, they want to visit every year that month. I didn't even want to tell them, but I knew they would get wind of it, since a lot of our family still lives in the same state as them. And some aren't just good at keeping secrets, even though their hearts are in the right place. It's going to be fun saying no a lot more. We're visiting our home state in July and are carefully planning it so my parents don't hijack it. Wish us luck. The next one is an entitled parent story. This happened several years ago, and it still makes me angry whenever I think about it. My dog was not feeling well, and we were sitting in the waiting room of the vet's office. A family sat down across from me, and the father saw my dog and told his daughter, who looked like she was about 2 or 3 years old, to go meet Lassie. Everything was fine until she decided to start climbing onto his back. I said, "No, he has arthritis and doesn't feel well. Please don't do that." The girl's father jumped up and ran over and started screaming so close to my face that I could feel his spit. He said I had no business bringing a dog like that in here if it wasn't good with kids, and there was something wrong with me if I wouldn't let a Lassie dog play with kids. I told him that he has arthritis and is not feeling well, and I did not want her trying to ride him. He verbally abused me, female baby boomer, some more, and told me to take the dog out of there, the vet's office, if it wasn't okay for his daughter to play with him. My dog was perfectly well behaved. He always is. I was trying to protect him. I looked over at the vet techs, hoping they would step in, but they were on the phone. He said, "Here, Lassie, here, girl," then picked up his daughter and held her over my dog to try to place her on my dog's back. I grabbed my dog's leash and pulled him out from under her just in time, and the kid started to whine. I said, "He's a boy, and he's here to see the vet. He is not a horse, and he's not here for your kid to ride." This resulted in a lot more verbal abuse from him, and I kept wishing the vet techs would get off the phone and do something. He was still berating me when a vet tech called my name and led me and my dog into an exam room. My dog was treated for gastroenteritis and recovered just fine. A little update. My dog is doing fine. His arthritis bothers him sometimes, but he is enjoying life. Fortunately, I never saw that entitled father again. I still get steamed whenever I remember him. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.